Hi, Julie Usher, Recipes for a Sweet Life. I am back with part 2 of my Christmas cookie box video. We're going to be doing the lids in this video. If you missed the bottoms, hop on over to that video. The link will be here to see how we put them together. In the first part of the video, I actually created this bottom of that box that you see in front of us. Now we're going to be doing the lids. They're a fun 2-layer cookie project, and again, they're very, very versatile. You can decorate them any number of ways. This particular lid has embossed fondant pieces on it as well as royal icing applique, and it's got a stamped center image. This particular lid goes on that big box up there, and it involves an airbrushed and stenciled interior. That's what the gold dots are, and then the green overlay is a stenciled royal icing. The whole outer ring has been stenciled with royal icing, and then I've layered other cookies on top, like these little poinsettia, which have been marbled. So many different ways to decorate these. I'm actually going to show you neither of these. I'm going to show you a version that involves embossed cookies, mostly because I'm on an embossed cookie kick lately. I've been doing them on lots of things. If you recall those jewelry pieces, the tiara and the necklace, they involved embossed cookies. So this lid's going to be very similar to one I did last year for Christmas that had Santa in the middle and had a bunch of little embossed cookie leaves similar to these all the way around. So what you need for this project, just for the lid, mind you, are a cookie ring that's been fully iced and top coated. This one I've already started the border on. This is about 7 inches across with about a 3.5 to 4 inch opening cut in the middle, and I'll have templates and guides and all of that in the links in the video description, so you can download those if you don't have the exact cutters. You will also need a backing cookie, which is about 5 inches. This is going to go behind the ring once they're mounted to create that 2-layer lid, and that's going to have the picture on it. And this backing cookie, as I said, is about 5 inches. You need it a little bit bigger than the opening so that there's room to glue it onto the underside without the glue peeking out. Again, this is fully iced, dried overnight completely because we're going to stamp on it, and we want that icing dry all the way through before we stamp, otherwise we'll smush the icing. Then in addition to that, you need about 16 of these embossed leaf pieces, and they are about 1.5 inches to 2 inches long, and 16 will just fit around them. I use this particular mold that I've had for years to make those pieces. I basically press the dough into the mold, clean up the edge a little bit, stick it in the oven, and bake in the mold, and that's how I get the most precise imprint from it. I have some discussion of how I emboss the dough in my jewelry video, so hop on over there if you want more detail. You don't have to use these exact molds. In fact, this one may be difficult to find online, but there are numerous other ones, and the links I'll have in the video description from First Impressions mold is one of my favorite sources for molds. So I think you'll find some suitable substitutes there. Okay, so that's what you need. I'm going to put these rings aside for the moment, and I'm going to talk about how to gild these embossed pieces, because you'll notice this one's really shiny, and the ones on my Santa box were really shiny and gold, whereas this is the normal gingerbread color. And I want to get them all gilded up before we get started. In this case, I am gilding with a little bit of luster dust extended with a clear extract to turn it into a paint. And I'm just using the back of this plastic lid as kind of my palette here. And I use about a 1-to-1 ratio visually of extract to dust to get a fairly opaque paint. I'm sponging it on because I actually want the gilding just on the top part of the embossed cookie. I don't want it down into those deep recesses. And if I were to paint it in with a long paintbrush or to airbrush it, I'd end up with a piece that was entirely gold all the way through, and I don't want that. So I've just mixed the two together, and I sponge it on like this just to get the high points. And different brands of gold powder have varying degrees of sheen, so you may want to experiment to see, and different hues of gold even, so you might want to experiment a little bit before you decide on which one you want to use. So simple sponging process just accents the top with the gold, and this doesn't take very long to dry, and in fact, if you're doing a lot of those, you may have to extend the paint a few more times because the alcohol will evaporate in the extract and the paint will revert to powder. So you will be adjusting the paint consistency as you go. Now the first step with most of my lids are to get the border elements down, like any inner border and any outer border, especially if you're laying cookies on top, which is what we're going to be doing here with the embossed cookies and what I did over here. Because if you put a lot of stuff on top and then try to do the borders later, it's just hard to get that pastry cone in and under the other cookies to do the job. So I've already started this one. We've done a lot of bead work in my videos, so I'm just going to finish out with big beads along the edge here. I'm using an icing of beadwork consistency, and you can find those adjustments in the link in the video description. I then let that all dry before placing stuff on top, but since most of them are already dry because I started this earlier, I'm just going to start by gluing these into place. I'm using a white glue here because, and not a tremendous amount, because if I want to adjust their placement at all, it's much easier to do that with little icing on there, and also to take white off something dark than it is to take a dark icing off of something light. So I think what I might do is just start by getting all these sort of laid on there before I glue any more down, and just get a sense of what kind of spacing I'm looking at. I often do this, and this is the virtue of applique work, either working with royal icing transfers or cookie appliques like these, is that you have the ability to design and move things around before anything gets placed on the cookie. Whereas if you're piping directly onto a cookie, you have a little less latitude. I wonder if I can get 17 on there. Might be able to if I just scooch them back a little bit. That might be quite nice, so I like them closely packed. Yep, we're going to shoot for 17. So strike what I said about 16. We're going to have 17 pieces on top. And now that I've got them nicely spaced, I'll go ahead and glue them down. That one's fixed. They're sticking out beyond the 7-inch edge a little bit, the diameter of the ring. But I kind of like that. Okay, I've got all the embossed cookie pieces down, and the icing glue underneath is still a little bit wet, and that's good because I'm going to be putting more royal icing transfers on top, and I want to do that right away so that if something isn't quite in the correct alignment by the time I'm done, I still have the flexibility to move any of the pieces that are down. If I wait too long, these pieces will be dry and it'll be a lot harder to move things around. So as far as additional accents, what I'd like to do is add a touch of red. So I'm going to add these small royal icing transfers in between each of the gilded pieces at the base. And again, if you don't know how to make royal icing transfers, jump on over to my part 1 royal icing transfer video where I make simple rounds and ovals, because I show exactly how to make these. And then I'm going to put larger 1/2-inch ones right dead center in the middle of each. These are a matte finish. You might note there's a different finish on these. That's normally how the royal icing will dry. This one's a little shiny, and that's because after the transfers were dry, I sprayed them with a little of this luster spray. This is PME brand, but it comes in a whole host of other brands as well. This is a pearl luster. It gives them that nice little iridescence. Okay, and I'm just going to continue with the gluing process before everything sets up. I think I'm going to put my red ones down first because they're stuck in between these other cookies and are hard to reach. That was my loose white icing I put there, and it exploded everywhere. See what I mean about it being easy to clean up white, relatively easy to clean up white? If that were brown, that would have stained that whole area. People have asked me to show more mistakes, so there's an example of one. Picked up the wrong icing. And then you could use tweezers for this. I tend to just put a blob down and then use my trussing needle to scooch things in place. And here's an example of where I think I need to move these 2 leaves back so that gets in as far as it is on in the other areas. So let me get all the red ones down, then we'll come down and put the white ones down. And then the ring of the lid will be finished, and we'll talk about how we do the center image inside. Okay, so I've got all the red ones down, and the one thing that I decided to do after I got them glued down was to gloss them up a bit. This is just another way to finish them. If you don't spray them with luster spray in advance, you can also just paint on a little bit of corn syrup, and it will dry super shiny like that. And I like that because it just gives us a little more glitz for the holidays. You don't want to do any painting of corn syrup on royal icing transfers until they're on your finished product, because the corn syrup can stay tacky, in which case it's just harder to place them onto the product if they're sticking to your fingers. So I'm just painting a little bit here, trying to get all the way around so they're also painted on the sides as well as from the top. And now is the time to do this because in my next step I'm going to be laying some larger white transfers in a way that might interfere with access to these later. Okay, so they're all glossed. Now I'm just going to do the same gluing technique, thick royal icing glue, to get these shimmery white ones down, just to finish it off. I'm going to do that all the way around. And to get similarly sized transfers, I draw guide marks on the acetate and pipe within the guide marks to ensure that they're all the same size if they're rounds. But you can check out that transfer video. That goes into great detail about how I do that. I'm just pushing them off, a little bit off. I had them a little too close to center, so I'm pushing them a little bit closer to the outer edge so I make sure I don't conceal any of the detail work that I just put down when I look at this from top down. Okay, finished ring. Just a combination of embossed cookies and royal icing applique, but again, many different ways to decorate. You could stencil it as I did here, you could use fondant applique, you could hand pipe on it. So I don't want you to feel limited necessarily by what I do in these videos. It's most important that you understand the techniques. Okay, so we are going to make a little image to go on the inside. This one's already done, so we're going to try to replicate that. And this is just rubber stamped with food coloring. This originally came with no food coloring on it. When I say I'm inking it, I'm just putting food coloring on it, my normal food coloring I use for tinting icings. So I apply food coloring and I blot off the excess, because if you get too much on there, you'll get a really blurry rubber stamp. I've got a whole nother video on rubber stamping, so you might want to check that out. Making sure it's well inked. I might have a little too much on it. You can see how there's a bit on the edge here, because I tilted the stamp when I was inking it. I'm going to wipe that off, because that might actually make its way onto the cookie. And I want it roughly centered, because mind you, I've got to apply glue to the outer part to stick it to the back of that ring. Just press uniformly. Icing underneath is completely dry, so I don't crack it or break through it with this process, because I am applying a fair bit of pressure. And it looks pretty. You could leave it like that, but I'm going to do a two-tone stamp, which is something I haven't done on video before, which is add some Christmas greens using same process, but green food coloring. I usually reserve different pads for different colors. You could rinse them off, but I find this way it saves a cleaning step. I just cover them up and I seal them in plastic bags so they don't get anything in them. Here I've got a slightly different stamp. This is a self-mounting one that mounts to an acrylic block, whereas the other one was wood-mounted. I actually kind of prefer these stamps because they're easier to situate on cookies, because you can see through the block. It's easier to locate them where you want them. So let's see. I want a little greenery coming through, maybe here. I don't want the stem kind of stand in the middle of the cookie, because I want it to look like the evergreen is coming in from the outer edge of the ring, if you will. And maybe one more right there. I do re-ink usually every time to make sure I get a really clear imprint. This is the beauty of the clear mount. I can make sure I'm not stamping right on his tail if I don't want to. Whoops. I rocked that a little bit. That might lead to a slightly blurry imprint. Sometimes it does, but there, it looks pretty good. Okay, so normally I would let that dry somewhat until the food coloring wasn't smudgeable on top. It's just a safeguard, but so that you don't mess up some work that you've already done. With this design, it's not crucial that you do that. Nevertheless, I am going to work with the one that I did earlier. And now the last step is just simply gluing these pieces together. I'm back to my thick icing glue, and you have a couple of options here. You could use brown to match the cookie color, but if any of that sneaks out onto the white image, it's going to be hard to clean up. So I think I'm going to opt for white. I'm applying it to pretty generously to the outer ring here, hoping that I didn't get any in the window frame. Nope, I don't think I did. And then while the icing is wet, I'm just going to situate that cookie underneath so that I have the image where I want it. I think that's pretty good. The other thing you might want to do is you can't move it infinitely on the bottom. You want to make sure this piece is relatively centered, because if it's not and it's too far off to one side, when you try to sit it in your box, it's not going to fit because that underlying piece may interfere with the clearance on the box. So you have some latitude, but not an infinite amount. And the other thing I'm going to do is just reinforce with more icing in the seam underneath while I can. This just gives more glue to keep it together. Now I would want this to dry completely, ideally overnight, before I put it on top of a cookie box, because there's the potential, if it's not dry, for that bottom cookie to fall off into the inside of the box, and you don't want that happening. So always let this dry quite a while until you can pick it up safely in one piece. You could do a pretty border under here, but this part isn't going to be seen, so I don't spend the time. I am kind of pushing it into the opening there where I can, though, to make sure it's really making contact with both cookies all the way around. Okay, and then to dry, just set it back on your cardboard, put it aside. I like to always work on cardboard so I can work on my next lid, get this out of the way while this is drying. Just as a reminder of what this looks like lidded, I have an example of one here, both bottom and lid put together. So this is kind of a crazy pattern. I think my sides are probably too busy for my lid. This just gives you an idea of what a sample box might look like. And I'll have a couple of other designs flashing through the screen for you to take a look at as well. On to the next 3D cookie project. I've got a Christmas cracker, holiday party cracker cookie coming up for you next. Until then, live sweetly.